33 out of 500. Now, if you're asking yourselves, what? I'm so glad you asked. That's a wonderful question to begin with. 33 out of the Fortune Global 500 CEOs are female. That's 6.6%. And now I'm not opening with that because I'm particularly enraged or saddened by this number. I'm opening up with this because I wanted your attention. And numbers like these and scandalous statements are what gets our attention. And also what often gets confused with leadership. Especially nowadays in the age of social media, when tech CEOs post all sorts of scandalous statements, and we just take that as a sign of authority. It's not. The second reason why I'm opening with this number is because this was relevant data. This was relevant data for myself when I was starting to seriously think about leadership. Because as many young and ambitious people, I was always fascinated by the idea of leadership, by power and influence, and why some people have it and others don't, and why a disproportionate number of those people are men. I've certainly met enough men and also seen enough headlines to know that this was not to be attributed solely to competence or intelligence. I have also met enough women to know that there are ambitious women out there and that it's not the fact that women just don't want it. And so this was the number that I had to keep in mind when I was starting to think about how to go about leadership. Because as great as it is to read about historical great men, and they are mostly men, that didn't really cut it for me. I needed to get my hands in there and try to test out some hypotheses, which is exactly what I did. And so I started working in the tech field, and also simultaneously I started devising my strategy, like any good self-respecting overanalyzer would. And so I learned that there are essentially 6 ways to get to leadership positions, those being promotion, hiring, election, appointment, founding, and family legacy. Now, 2 got quickly scratched off the list, and those were election and appointment. Those are usually reserved for political roles, and I was always way too politically incorrect for political roles, so that was not going to happen. One other thing that got scratched off the list was family legacy. Unfortunately, again, I was born in the teeny tiny country of Croatia to a middle-class family, so I was not inheriting any empires. And then there were 3. And so, again, in reading and in starting to get my first work experiences, I came to the following conclusions. So promotion mostly happens based on technical skill. You are really good at your job, and so you climb up the corporate ladder. Wonderful, simple. Hiring mostly happens based on a proven track record of both technical skill and managerial skill, and that I'm pretty convinced that there's some degree of black magic in there. I'm seriously very confused with how C-suite headhunting works, and by the way, I was also at the beginning of my career, so that was not happening, scratching it off the list. And then we had founding, which makes success highly unpredictable, and is mostly based on entrepreneurial skill. And as tempting as this always was, I had my first interaction with entrepreneurship at the age of 6. So I was spending most of my summers on a teeny tiny island in Croatia, where my family is originally from, and there were a bunch of children selling shells. And I always thought to myself, well, that's kind of weird. Why would you sell shells? People just can collect those. And so I decided to upgrade that, and I started building figurines and drawing on these shells. And I did my market research, I put on competitive prices, I picked the best spot, and quite frankly, I was making a lot of money for a 6, 7, 8-year-old. But I've also learned fairly quickly that I'm my own worst boss. And I mean it, like 9 years of age, no days off. I was like, maybe push that for when promotion, does not come through. And so we decided to focus on promotion, which was mostly based on technical skill. And so I started working with companies, and I focused my attention on tech companies because that was most of my environment. And I realized that they mostly rely on 4 pillars, or rather 4 ladders that one can climb. These were finance, operations, technology, and compliance. But I also realized one other thing. So I was always coming in as an external consultant, and I got a chance to actually talk to all the people in all the different positions where I wanted to go. And I realized that all of them were talking to me, but none of them were really talking to each other. Or if they were talking to each other, they were more often talking past each other. So saying things out loud, but not really communicating. So I wondered why that is the case, because that just seemed like a very bad strategic choice for running a business. And so for some of them, the answer was pretty simple. Most of them were startups. And as the LinkedIn CEO once said, it's kind of like jumping off a cliff and building your plane on the way down. You just get people on board who are there for the mission, and you try to build a product, and you don't really care that much how great they are at managing the business or managing people. That's like future you concern. Okay, for startups, I could understand why this would be happening. But for some of the more established, grown-up businesses, why does this happen? I mean, at some point, you have to start caring about who gets promoted, and those are supposed to be the best people, right? And so I kind of came to the conclusion that this is actually the realization of the Peters Principle. Now, the Peters Principle is a real thing. There's a book by Lawrence J. Peters on the Peters Principle, and it essentially says that everyone in hierarchical organizations progresses to the level of their incompetence. Now, what I think Peter meant by that is you get promoted because you were really good at your job. And then your next job demands other sets of skills that you did not previously have. As long as you acquire those quickly, are quick on your feet, you will progress further, and at one point you will just stop because you no longer can tackle all these skills that you need. Because technical skill is not enough for leadership. Leadership lives somewhere between technical expertise, managerial skills, and there are also entrepreneurial skills. Because as great as it is to deeply know your field and be able to also manage the people who did what you previously have done, you also need to have an idea, a vision of where you want to take it. And so that's where leadership lives, but it's still not necessarily great. Because as I said, I was working with big organizations that presumably knew all of that. I was not inventing new things. And so I realized that why this was happening is because they were focusing on a particular technical skill. They were climbing a particular ladder in the organization. And even if they were talking about the same problem, they had very different ideas about what the problem actually is. And so we find ourselves in a situation of the blind man and the elephant, where everyone kind of can't even agree that there's an elephant in the room, let alone address it. And so going back to our average tech company incorporated, and in case you were wondering, that is me wondering what is going on, I started thinking about why were people talking to me? And I realized that I had a very lucky coincidence, which is that I was usually based between technology and compliance, and I happened to have done coding in high school. So I spoke both languages. Now, once I have realized that, I started honing those skills. So my initial programming experience was in C++, which if you don't know what is, I envy you for it. Then I decided I need to learn more. So I learned Python, HTML, JavaScript, and the more I knew, the better I was at communicating with different people, at translating the requirements of what the tech team wanted and what the compliance team wanted. And we could actually move from making compliance the no division into actually building something together. And now the testing phase for this is still in progress, which is also why this talk is not titled How to Be a Great Leader, because I'm still not sure that I have it right. But I can definitely tell you how not to be a great leader. And that is by taking the role of one of the blind men, leading the rest of the blind men over the edge of a cliff, such as in Peter Bruegel's Blind Leading the Blind image. In a multidisciplinary, interconnected, intercultural world, the worst thing that you can do is stay in your lane. Leaders need to be able to go to the balcony, as many metaphors always say. To go to the balcony, you need to actually understand what you are looking at. And unless you speak other languages, and I mean that both in the sense of languages, but also discipline as a language, unless you speak other languages, you will never be able to effectively communicate, to effectively translate what you are asking people to do, and to also understand their concerns. Because you will, just as in many organizations that I have seen, be talking past each other instead of to each other. Now, I can't tell you what this exactly means in your particular organization or discipline. I know that for me, it meant learning coding. Once I was satisfied with my coding skills, I decided that I need to learn what financial consequences some of my decisions have. So currently, I'm taking courses on finance and accounting and stuff like that. This is a never-ending process, but it has to begin somewhere, because otherwise, you might as well climb the corporate ladder and become a leader. But that is not what leadership is. Leadership is not a reward, it's not a status symbol, it's not a position. It's an activity, and it's the way that you act with those around you.